The morning of May 9th arrived without ceremony. That's the part that bothers me most even now. There was nothing special about it. No strange dreams, no storms pressing against the windows, no sense that the day was any different from the hundreds that came before it. Just heat, early heat, already sitting heavy in the air like it had nowhere else to go. The kind that made the house feel smaller than it was. Ceiling fans hummed in every room, chopping the air into useless pieces, fighting a battle they were never going to win. I remember lying on the living room floor, my cheek pressed against the cool patch beneath the coffee table, tightening the strap on my backpack again, even though I'd already done it twice. The fabric was worn thin where my fingers kept pulling at it. I didn't need anything in the bag that badly, I just needed something to do with my hands. Charlotte leaned against my shoulder, quiet in the way she got when places felt wrong. Her fingers were curled into my sleeve, not tight enough to hurt but firm, anchoring herself. She didn't say anything. She rarely did unless she had to. Mom moved through the room barefoot, stepping around open suitcases, folding clothes with quick, practiced motions. She'd packed and unpacked most of her life. Moving jobs, moving apartments, adjusting. She was good at it. Too good. You get good at things you don't expect to last. Dad noticed the silence first. I didn't understand that at the time. I just saw him pause with a shirt halfway folded in his hands, his eyes unfocusing like he'd heard something no one else had. Later, I'd recognize that look, that moment when the world didn't quite line up with itself. Not peaceful silence. The other kind. The kind that makes you aware of your own breathing, of the way your chest rises and falls without asking permission. James stood near the front door. He hadn't sat down once since I'd woken up. He held his keys in his right hand, fingers clenched so tightly the metal bit into his skin. Every few seconds he checked his watch, then the door, then the hallway that led deeper into the house, like something might come walking out if he looked away for too long. I remember thinking he looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. His clothes hung on him wrong, like they belonged to someone else now. There were dark circles under his eyes, deep enough to look permanent. "We should leave today," James said. His voice cut through the hum of the fans like a blade. Dad didn't look up. "Tomorrow morning's fine." James swallowed. I saw his jaw tighten, muscles jumping beneath the skin. Today would be better. Mom glanced over her shoulder, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "The campsite isn't going anywhere, James." He tried to smile then. It didn't work. It stretched thin across his face, fragile, like it might crack if anyone pushed it too far. Charlotte shifted beside me. J, she started. Her breath caught. She hated when everyone turned to look at her. You could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, in the way she leaned just a little closer to me. But she pushed through it anyway, stubborn in her own quiet way. "James? Mr. James?" I squeezed her hand, slow and steady. Ophelia?" she finished. The room went still. Not dramatic stillness, no music cutting out, no sudden quiet like in movies. Just a pause so complete it felt deliberate. James froze. For half a second I thought he might pretend he hadn't heard her, pretend the word hadn't landed where it had. But then he exhaled, long and slow, like he'd been holding his breath since the question existed. "She's not coming," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Mom frowned gently. "Is she sick?" James nodded once. "Something like that." Charlotte tilted her head, confused. But that she always comes." His fingers tightened around the keys, The metal clinked softly. Not this time. No one pushed further. You could feel it, the invisible wall James had placed between himself and the rest of us. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief either. It was something harder, something sealed. Dad finally looked up. James's eyes were sunken, dark with exhaustion. And there was something else there, something Dad didn't like at all. Recognition. I didn't know what he recognized then, only know that years later, when he told me about it, he said it felt like a memory trying to crawl back into his head before being shoved down again. James noticed him staring. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then James looked away. "I'll drive," he said quickly. "I know the road." Dad hesitated. I insist. The word came out sharper than James seemed to intend. Mom raised an eyebrow. James softened immediately. "I mean, it's been a while since I got out. I'd like to." Dad nodded slowly. "All right." Outside, a dog barked once, then went quiet. That night, I slept. Dad didn't. Years later, he told me he lay awake long after Mom's breathing evened out beside him, staring into the dark, turning the same thoughts over and over in his head. James's urgency, Ophelia's absence, that look in James's eyes. "Not again," he whispered. He said the words tasted old. Somewhere far beyond the city, beyond the last stretch of road where phone signals died and trees began to close in on themselves, the forest waited. It always did. We left just after sunrise. The city peeled away the way it always did, slowly at first, then all at once. Apartment blocks thinned into houses, houses into shops, and shops into long, empty stretches of road where nothing moved unless it wanted to. I watched it happen through the back window, the familiar turning unfamiliar, without any clear moment where I could say it had changed. James drove with both hands locked on the steering wheel. His knuckles were pale, the skin stretched tight over bone. He sat too upright, shoulders rigid, like the seat might betray him if he relaxed even a little. The radio played something bright and forgettable. A song you could hum without knowing the words. I bobbed my head to the rhythm, more out of habit than enjoyment. Charlotte sat beside me, knees tucked up, counting trees as they passed. 1, 2, 3. Her voice snagged on the number. She stopped counting altogether and stared out the window, lips pressed tight. Mom noticed. She always did. "You okay, sweetheart?" Charlotte nodded too quickly. James turned the volume up. Dad watched him from the passenger seat. Every few minutes, James adjusted the rear-view mirror, not to check traffic, but to look at us, at me, at Charlotte. Each time he looked away again just as fast, jaw clenched like he'd touched something hot. "You sure this is the right way?" Mom asked after a while. James didn't hesitate. "Yes." The road narrowed. Asphalt cracked and faded, giving way to gravel that popped beneath the tires. Mom checked her phone, then frowned. "No network," she said lightly. "Figures." James didn't smile. The forest began without warning. One moment there was sky on either side of the road. The next, trees rose up close and tight, branches knitting together overhead like they were closing a door. The sunlight dimmed, filtered through layers of leaves. The air cooled just enough to notice. "This place looks cool," I said, leaning forward between the seats. James swallowed. Dad shifted beside him. I didn't know it then, but he felt it right there,
the tightening in his chest, the old recognition, like stepping into a room you'd sworn never to enter again. "How far is the campsite?" Dad asked. James hesitated. Just a second too long. "Close," he said. "Very close." A bump in the road made Charlotte gasp. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard. "Sorry," James muttered, easing the wheel. Dad's eyes flicked to the trees. Something was wrong with them. I couldn't have explained it if you'd asked me then. They were just trees, tall, old, silent, but they leaned inward subtly, as if listening, as if the road cutting through them was an intrusion they hadn't forgotten. Dad's mouth went dry. He remembered another road, another forest, another silence. "You should slow down," he said quietly. James did. We passed a rusted sign, half swallowed by vines. The words were faded beyond recognition, but someone had scratched something on the metal long ago, deep enough to leave scars. James didn't look. Dad did. His stomach dropped. He'd seen that sign before. Not this one, not exactly, but one like it. Same placement, same wrong feeling clinging to it like damp. "How much further?" Mom asked. James opened his mouth to answer. The radio crackled. Static hissed through the speakers, sharp and sudden. The music warped, slowed, then dissolved into noise. Charlotte whimpered. James slapped the radio off. The silence that followed was heavier than before. No birds, no wind, just the hum of the engine and the soft sound of tires on gravel. Dad leaned back in his seat. "This forest," he said slowly.
What's its name? James's grip tightened. I don't know. It was a lie. Dad closed his eyes. Images pressed against the backs of his eyelids. Blurred, incomplete. Blood where there shouldn't have been blood. Shapes that didn't make sense until they did. Screams that ended too quickly. "We should turn back," he said. James shook his head. "No." "Dad, James." James's voice cracked. "I said no." The car rolled forward, deeper into the trees. Charlotte pressed her face into my shoulder, hiding. I wrapped an arm around her, the excitement I had felt earlier gone now, replaced with something quieter and sharper. The forest felt closer. Not physically, something else. As if the distance between here and there had folded in on itself. As if we had already crossed a line. Far ahead, between the trees, something pale stood, very still. James didn't slow down. Dad said nothing. Some warnings come too late. The campsite appeared suddenly, as if the forest had decided at the last possible moment to allow it. A clearing opened beside the road. Bare earth. A ring of old stones blackened by past fires. A single wooden table warped by rain and time. Beyond it, trees stood in a rough circle, their trunks thick and scarred, their branches tangled overhead like fingers locked together. James pulled the car in and turned off the engine. The silence rushed in. "That's it?" I asked. James nodded. "This is the place." Charlotte didn't move. She stared out the window, eyes fixed on the tree line. I don't like it," she whispered. Mom brushed her hair back gently. "It's just quiet, sweetheart." Even as she said it, I could see the doubt flicker across her face. Sound didn't travel here the way it should have. It sank. The air felt old, like it had been trapped for a very long time. Dad stepped out of the car last. The moment his feet touched the ground, his chest tightened. Nothing had changed. The layout was different. The trees were different. The road hadn't been paved the last time. But the feeling, the wrongness, was identical.
like the forest had rearranged itself but kept the same intention. James began unloading supplies too quickly, hands moving with nervous purpose. "We should set up before it gets dark," he said.
Night comes fast here. How do you know? I asked. James didn't answer. We worked in near silence. Mom laid out food. I helped Dad with the tent. Charlotte stayed close, never letting go of my hand. Every so often, James stopped what he was doing and looked toward the trees, listening. Dad noticed. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. James blinked. "Nothing." A lie. Again. By late afternoon, the light began to change. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. The trees seemed closer now, their presence pressing in from all sides. Mom tried to lighten the mood, pointing out how cool the air felt, how peaceful it was. No one laughed. Dad walked to the edge of the clearing. The forest began just a few steps away. He stared into it, past the first line of trunks, trying to see how deep it went. The trees swallowed distance. "Albert," Mom called, "don't wander off." "I won't," he said. He didn't tell her that last time someone had said the same thing. We lit the campfire as the sun dipped below the trees. Flames crackled, throwing flickering light across our faces. For a moment, just a moment, it almost felt normal. James stared into the fire. "You ever feel like some places remember things?" he asked. I shrugged. Places don't remember. James didn't look at me. "People say that." Dad felt his stomach drop. "But some places," James continued, voice low, "they don't forget." Mom frowned. "James, you're creeping the kids out." James snapped out of it, forcing a laugh. "Sorry. Bad joke." Charlotte tugged on Dad's sleeve. Dad?" she asked softly. "Yes, Charlotte?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Here, people don't die, right? Do they?" The fire popped loudly. Everyone froze. "Why would you ask that?" Mom said too quickly. Charlotte shook her head. "I don't know." But Dad did. He looked at James. James was pale now, sweat beading at his hairline despite the cool air. His eyes flicked from Charlotte to the forest and back again. "It's getting dark. We should sleep early." "No stories?" I asked. James shook his head. "No stories." Night fell fast. Too fast. By the time we crawled into our tents, the forest was completely dark. No moonlight reached the ground. The fire burned low, its glow swallowed almost immediately by the trees. Dad lay awake, listening. There were no insects, no wind, just stillness, so deep it rang in his ears. Then, far away, something moved. Not a footstep, not a branch snapping. Something heavier. He closed his eyes. He had prayed he was wrong. He wasn't. The sound came from the forest. Not close enough to point at, not far enough to pretend it wasn't real. Heavy. It hit the ground with a dull, wet thud, like something large dropping onto soil that had already been softened by rain. The earth shuddered beneath it, just enough for me to feel it through the thin fabric of the tent floor. Charlotte sat up beside me with a sharp intake of breath. "Leo," she whispered. Her voice was small, tight. She already knew. I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd been lying there listening to the quiet, to the absence of everything that was supposed to be there. Insects, wind, the distant movement of animals,
all of it missing, like the forest had decided to hold its breath. Another sound followed, slower this time, dragging. Something scraped against the ground, leaving a noise that made my teeth ache. I could hear it clearly now, not just one movement, but a rhythm, patient, deliberate. Dad pushed himself upright in the tent across from ours. I heard the fabric shift, his breath catching as the sound registered. Mom stirred beside him. "What is it?" she murmured, still half asleep. Before he could answer, James' voice cut through the dark. "Everyone stay where you are." There was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty, just command. Dad unzipped the tent anyway. I could hear him moving, careful but fast. I wanted to call out to him, to tell him not to, but my throat felt locked, like the sound wouldn't come out if I tried. The campfire had burned down to embers. Just enough light remained to show the clearing in broken pieces. And something else. Something lay near the edge of the light. Dad stopped short. I saw his body stiffen. He didn't move for a long second, like he was afraid that if he did, whatever he was looking at would become permanent. Then he took one step closer. My stomach dropped. It was small. Too small. James was already there, standing a few feet away from it. I hadn't heard him move. He stood frozen, shoulders shaking, hands clenched at his sides so tightly I could see the tension even in the dim light. Dad made a sound then. Not a scream, not a word, just a broken noise that escaped before he could stop it. James dropped to his knees beside her. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He reached for her and stopped inches away, his hands hovering, trembling, like he was afraid she might crumble if he touched her. Behind me, Mom gasped. I didn't see it happen. My hands were already over Charlotte's eyes. "Don't look," I whispered fiercely, pulling her face into my chest. "Don't look." She struggled for half a second. Then she went still. Too late. She'd already seen the blood. Her stammer came back all at once, panic tearing through her words. Why is there—" "Inside," Dad said sharply. "Now." But the forest moved. 3 shapes stepped forward from between the trees. They didn't rush. They didn't emerge all at once. They simply appeared, as if they'd been standing there the whole time, waiting for the light to reach them. They were tall, far too tall. Each one stood easily over 7 feet, their bodies stretched wrong, proportions skewed in ways my brain refused to settle into. Where arms should have been, there was nothing, just smooth, unfinished flesh. Where faces should have been, there were no features at all. No eyes, no mouths, only legs. Long, thick, muscled, and soaked in blood. They stood at the edge of the clearing, unmoving, waiting. Charlotte screamed. One of the figures tilted its head, not in curiosity, in recognition. Its leg dragged forward, slow and deliberate, carving a shallow line through the dirt. James sobbed. The sound tore out of him, raw and animal. "Please," he cried. "I brought her. I did what you wanted. Please." Dad turned on him. "James, what did you do?" James didn't look at him. He couldn't. "I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought it was over." The second figure stepped closer. The ground trembled under its weight. Dad felt it then, the old fear, sharp and absolute, rising up from somewhere deep inside him. "They don't hunt," he whispered, the words ripping free before he could stop them. "They repeat." The third figure moved. Mom grabbed Charlotte, pulling her into her arms. I stepped back instinctively, positioning myself between my sister and the clearing, my heart slamming so hard I thought it might burst. James surged forward suddenly, rage cutting through his grief. "No!" he screamed. He didn't reach them. One of the figures lashed out. There was a sound, wet and final. James collapsed, clutching his arm, screaming as blood poured between his fingers. I didn't look down. I already knew. "Run," Dad said. This time, Mom didn't argue. We ran. There wasn't a moment where it felt like a decision. It was instinct, pure and violent. Mom scooped Charlotte up into her arms, gripping her like she was afraid the forest itself might reach out and take her if she loosened even a little. I stayed close to Dad, my feet slipping on roots and loose soil, my lungs already burning. Behind us, the forest answered. Not with shouts, not with snarls, with movement. Heavy steps struck the ground in a slow, patient rhythm, not fast, never fast, as if there were no need to hurry, as if they knew exactly how this would end. Dad knew that sound. "They won't rush," he said, his breath tearing in and out of his chest. "They never do." Mom stumbled. Dad caught her elbow without slowing, keeping her upright, forcing her forward. "How do you know?" she gasped. He didn't answer. A shape crossed between the trees ahead, too tall, too pale, its legs dragging long lines through the dirt. Another moved to our right. The third stayed behind us, keeping pace without effort. Corralling. "Car!" I shouted.
The car. The clearing burst back into view just as something slammed into the vehicle. Glass exploded outward in a spray of glittering shards. The windshield caved inward in a single, crushing impact that punched straight through to the back window. Metal screamed as the car rocked violently, then went still. Charlotte screamed into Mom's shoulder. Something inside me went cold. "No," Dad whispered. "It's done." The figures were closer now, close enough that I could hear the sound their legs made against the ground, wet, dragging, wrong. Mom turned to Dad. He didn't need to say anything. She already knew. Mom set Charlotte down gently, hands shaking as she brushed dirt from her knees. She pressed her forehead to Charlotte's, breathing her in like she was trying to memorize her. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Both of you." "No," I said, panic ripping through me. "Mom." She smiled. It was small, steady, final. "Take your sister," she said. "Listen to your father." Dad grabbed her wrist. "Lily." Repeat," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "So we break the pattern." Before either of us could stop her, Mom stepped forward, away from us, away from the last scraps of safety. The figures turned toward her at once, every one of them. Dad screamed her name. The forest swallowed the sound. I didn't watch. I couldn't. Dad turned, dragging me with him, shoving Charlotte into my arms. We ran again, harder this time, deeper into the trees. Charlotte sobbed, her face buried in my chest, her body shaking with every breath. "Dad," she cried. "Mom." "I know," Dad said hoarsely. "I know." One of the figures shifted direction. I felt it, like pressure behind my eyes, like something tightening. "They followed the choice," Dad said. "They always have." He stopped. I almost collided with him. "Dad?" I said. He knelt in front of me, gripping my shoulders hard enough to hurt.
His eyes searched my face like he was trying to burn it into his memory. "Listen to me," he said. "You don't stop running, no matter what you hear." "No," I whispered. "You're coming with us." He shook his head. He stood and stepped back, away from us, towards the sound of dragging steps. "Dad!" I cried. He forced a smile. "Take care of your sister," he said. "You're good at that." Then he turned and ran the other way. The forest closed behind him. I don't know how long we ran after that. Time stopped behaving like time. It broke into pieces, breath, pain, the sound of Charlotte crying against my chest. Branches tore at my arms, roots grabbed at my feet. I fell once, hard enough to knock the air out of me, and got back up without thinking. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't listen. That part matters. Charlotte's sobs softened into something smaller, not calm, never calm, but thinner, like her body was running out of room for fear. "Leo," she whispered, "I can't hear them." I slowed before I meant to. The forest had gone still again. No dragging steps, no pressure behind my eyes, just the sound of our breathing and the distant crackle of something burning. Fire. I turned toward it. The car was a ruin. Metal twisted inward like it had been punched by something impossibly strong. Glass covered the ground in dull, broken constellations. Flames licked weakly from beneath the hood, coughing smoke into the trees. Near it, a figure knelt. James. He was alive. One arm ended at the shoulder, wrapped tight in torn fabric. Blood had soaked through and dried dark against his shirt. His face looked gray, emptied out, his eyes too big in his skull. When he saw us, something in him collapsed. "Leo?" he croaked. "Charlotte?" Charlotte flinched at the sound of his voice and pressed her face harder into my chest. James struggled to his feet, swaying. "They're gone," he said. "For now." I stared past him, searching the tree line. "My mom and dad?" James closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The forest didn't answer. James led us away from the clearing, staying close to the road like he was afraid to step too far in either direction. Dawn crept in slowly, a pale, fragile light that felt undeserved. The darkness thinned, but it didn't leave. It just stepped back. We didn't talk. There wasn't anything left to say. Somewhere behind us, deep in the trees, something heavy moved once. Then it didn't follow.
The Ackley name didn't survive. Not officially. Paperwork took care of that. Forms, signatures, new last names that fit more easily on school records and hospital files. Charlotte took a new name. So did I. It made things simpler. Fewer questions. Fewer looks that lingered too long. James never drove near forests again. He planned routes carefully, even years later, tracing roads with his finger before he ever left the house. If trees crowded too close to the shoulder, he turned around without explanation. No arguments, no hesitation. He learned how to live with one hand. Cooking took longer. Writing looked awkward. Holding a child during nightmares became something he did with his whole body instead of his arms. He never complained, never explained. He didn't ask for forgiveness either. I don't think he believed in it anymore. Charlotte's stammer worsened. Some words locked her throat completely. Certain sounds, low, dragging ones, froze her in place. At night, she dreamed of silence so deep it rang, like pressure building behind her ears.
She woke shaking, gasping for air, and James would sit with her until morning without saying a word. I never dreamed. I remembered. Years passed anyway. Life does that, whether you're ready or not. School, work, houses that didn't feel like homes. Small moments of laughter that arrived unexpectedly and left just as fast, like they weren't sure they were allowed to stay. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, Charlotte would stop whatever she was doing. Once, years later, she stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. The window was open just enough to let the evening air in. The scent of pine drifted through the screen, faint but unmistakable. She didn't turn around. "They're not hunting," she said softly. I nodded from the table. "They repeat." James heard that once. He paused in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame. He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't ask what she meant. Some knowledge isn't meant to be spoken out loud. Some stories don't end with closure. They end with understanding. And far from any road, far from any name anyone still remembered, the forest waited. Not hungry, just patient. That's everything I remember. Recording ends.